welcome. This is Spiritual Psychic Cynthia Killian again, also known as Psychic Cynthia. And welcome back, my fellow co-psychics and seekers on the spiritual psychic path. And today's video is covering tips for making predictions. As in, if you're doing your own readings for yourself or especially for others, what are some tips for making good predictions? And just so you know, this is a follow-up to a previous video that I did about making predictions. And if you haven't checked that video out yet, you might want to, okay? Because I do talk in there about knowing when predictions are needed. In other words, sometimes we try to make predictions when that's not what is needed in the reading at all. But today I just want to touch on the basics, or maybe not even the basics, just some quick tips, briefly, about some ways that can help enhance your predictive skills in readings. You know, in other words, how can you increase your accuracy rate with predictions? You know, as I said before in the last video, one thing I just want to mention real briefly here, and I won't go on and on because I already did a whole video relating to that, is one way to increase your accuracy rate when making predictions as a psychic is to first look into the past and the present moment. If you can understand the present moment of what is going on, and you can understand the past, usually you will have a strong chance of statistically getting it right in terms of your predictions. And remember, predictions are statistical. Even if you don't use numbers or percents, what I mean by that is they're all theoretical and it's all probability. Until something has actually happened, there is never a 100% chance that it will happen. Remember that, okay? So when we're making predictions, what we're really filling in for energetically is what will most likely happen. And I think a good way to really start with that, like even to make a prediction, right, in your readings. And of course, when I say this, I'm assuming that you know basic reading skills. And maybe you don't. Well, if you don't, you might want to get some of my courses, or, I don't know, study with another teacher, study with me privately, or learn those basic reading skills, however you want to do that, okay? But I'm assuming that you have some kind of basic psychic reading skills and that, you know, you're doing readings, okay? And, you know, to get that foundation for doing predictions, and which really, doing predictions is advanced, okay? I think. I don't think you should start out trying to do predictions, because guess what? You're not going to be good at it. It's an advanced art form, or at least an intermediate art form. And I say that because the first step in your emergence as a psychic, as an intuitive, as a reader, the first step is always you learning your own personal psychic style. In other words, how does your inner psychic communicate with you? What kind of symbols or words or sounds or feelings does it use, and what do those mean for you personally? And you see, that's unique to each reader. It's not universal. I mean, there might be some similarities from psychic to psychic, but we're all unique, we're all different. So you really have to do some readings first and get a sense of your own psychic style before you're going to even understand what you're getting in terms of being able to use it for predictions, like how you get data. Does that make sense? You need to understand how you personally receive psychic data. And the only way to do that is to get readings. And listen, if you have to try predictions in the process of that, you can. Just don't be surprised if you're not very good at it at first, because how could you be good at it, making prediction, when first of all, that's a statistical probability process. So that's difficult to start with, right? Because you're going to be looking at all these different possibilities. And the future is not set. Remember, we talked about that in the last video. Just let me reiterate that the future is not set until it actually happens. Okay, in some cases, it takes on a solidity before something actually happens, but it usually has to go a while down a path before that happens. There's a lot of variables, a lot of X factors. Anything can happen to disrupt it until it's really started to firm up. And that's why crazy things happen sometimes, and maybe you make a prediction and it seems like it's going in just that direction, and then boom, right? Something comes out of the blue and then it goes a completely different way. Does that mean that you're a bad psychic? No. Does that even mean your prediction was wrong? Absolutely not. I mean, I would say if it was really moving in that direction and you could tell it was, and then it didn't, your prediction is still right in terms of it, being a probability. I mean, I guess we have to maybe reframe the way we think about making predictions. Okay? I mean, seriously, I don't believe everything's preordained. Do you? Do you believe everything that happens in your life is just set in stone before you're born? I don't believe that. Are some things preordained? Perhaps. Perhaps so. We could get into karma. We could get into, from the northern tradition, Orlog and Weird, the sisters that sat at the base of the world tree and spin the web. We could talk about those cosmic forces that we call fate, basically. And I get it. A lot of the people coming to you for readings, they believe their lives are preordained. But it's not that simple. To summarize it again, how I have experienced it, at least in all the readings I've done, is that for most of us there is a basic blueprint of possibilities that we're working within. But there are many possibilities. Now, some people may seem to have more than others, or at different times in your life, there may be more possibilities, more choices you could make than at others. So then the blueprint is wider. And listen, here's a tip right here, right at the top. The wider the blueprint you're dealing with, in other words, the more choices that person has that you're reading for, even if it's yourself, the more difficult it's going to be to predict the future accurately. Because you have more, X factors, right? Does that make sense? So I just want you to know this, and I know I keep talking about how difficult it is. It's because I'm being realistic here, and I'm not going to bullshit you, okay? Anybody who says it's easy to predict the future, that's simply not true. But I think that if you come into it with a full awareness of these different factors, it will help. Now, so understand that most people are working with a blueprint, but that within that blueprint they have a lot of variabilities, right? There's a lot of variables. And I'm telling you that too because I don't want you to make a mistake that I see a lot of psychics make. And that is that they come into the reading for their client or their sitter with preconceived ideas of how these things might turn out or how they could turn out according to variables that they know in their own life. So you need to understand that we're all playing on a different game board. Did you hear that? Did you hear what I just said? Hello, are you listening? Please listen. Each individual is playing on a different game board of variables, probabilities, and possibilities. So you need to bring a fresh heart, a fresh mind, fresh eyes, and a fresh third eye to every reading for every person you read for. And get this, even if it's the same person who you've read for before, that person could have a slightly different game board this time when you're reading for them than last time. Why is that? Because there's variables. And it's like a chessboard, okay? If you move one piece, it affects the whole board. Pieces are constantly being taken in and brought in and then moved out. You got it? Now listen, I don't even play chess, but I get this. I get this because I do readings and predict the future. And according to some of my clients, I'm pretty good at it, okay? Even then, it's hard, okay? But this is what you have to keep in mind, the game board. So what you're really reading, if you want to get it right, is you're reading the game board. That's why I talked about in the first video in this series I talk so much about get a grasp of where that client is at in the present moment. You know, I'm talking about psychically too, but you can also ask a couple questions if you want. And listen, I'm not opposed to that for people who are just beginning to read, especially. I mean, you may need some feedback and clarification. Now, the more experienced you become, the less you need them to tell you anything. But still, sometimes it helps to kind of build that relationship if you ask a couple of questions. That's something I had to learn because when I was much younger, I mean, I was really, really kind of strict in my readings, and I would just get in there and tell them everything. And I was good, okay? Don't get me wrong, the readings were great. But, you know, the connection there, the heart connection wasn't flowing. I guess you might say the art of the counseling wasn't there. So sometimes you might just ask a question or two to let them know you're interested in kind of bonding with them during the reading. Okay, that's outside of making predictions, but it is part of the art of psychic reading. So back to making predictions. You know, use your psychic awareness to get a feeling for the game board. And what I would like to see you look for are the 1 or 2 or no more than 3 strongest probabilities. So you're feeling in energetically to what is most likely going to be happening. Let's say if they ask you a question, I'm just going to draw one out of my mind here. They're in a relationship and it's struggling right now, and they ask you, do you see us staying together? Now, that's a question about predicting the future. That's really not necessarily just a yes or no question. I mean, it could be much more complex than that. It could be that you see them staying together for a time, then you see them separated for a time, and then you see them coming back together again, or you see them separating and then coming back together in the far distant future. Do you see why I say this is hard? This is actually answering questions like these are very complex. So, you know, if that's the question, you need to, first of all, remember what I said previously. You need to get a feel for the past patterns here, any past patterns you can in the relationship, because often the past does determine the future. It doesn't have to. And if the two people are really meditating and spiritually awakening, they can break those patterns. But let's face it, most people are in the mainstream. When they come to you, especially for a first or second or even a third or fourth reading, usually they're not in a place yet where they're consciously breaking those patterns. Now, if they are in a place where they're consciously working with their patterns, then they're even harder to read for in terms of the future, because then there's going to be more variables, okay? But let's just say it's just a normal person, which there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. God bless the normal mainstream people of the world. I mean, weren't we all a little bit like that at one time? Well, I mean, I don't know, I had an unusual childhood, and I bet you did too, but there's probably somewhere inside where we have a little bit of that, right? Anyway, so this normal mainstream person is asking you a question about what do you see for the future of this relationship, essentially. And actually, that's how I would reword it in my mind, by the way. When a client asks me, do you see us staying together? In my mind, internally, I am rewording that question to myself. I'm asking, what do I see for the future of this relationship? So reword the question if you need to. That's a tip right there. Because a lot of times when people are asking these kinds of questions, they might be in distress, or maybe they just don't know how to word the question in such a good way as to facilitate the best reading. So you need to learn how to mentally reword these questions that are asked to you. Yes, you want to answer what they're asking, but then you sometimes have to figure out what it is they're really asking, okay? So that's a tip there. And then you're going to look for, as you search this out psychically, remember you've got to know how you receive information, right? Whether that's visually or, you feel. I do think with the future, or a lot of people, it isn't just seeing visions, okay? If you're a seer, that's great. So am I. I mean, I actually perceive on all levels. But for me, at least, I could see the different possible futures. And listen, at first you may only see one, That doesn't mean there's only one. That means you only see one because you are a neophyte psychic. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, okay? I'm just saying that when we're first beginning, obviously if you're just starting out doing readings, and let's say you've done less than 100 readings, let's say you've only done 5 readings, okay? Obviously, a person who's only done 5 or 10 readings, their psychic senses are not going to be as strong or well developed as someone who's done 100 readings or someone who's done 1,000 readings. And their senses are not going to be as practiced and as strong and as developed as a psychic who's done 10,000 or more readings. Do you see what I mean? I mean, this is like a muscle. This ability to read, you have to use it. And the more you use it, the sharper it gets. That's why I always say the most important thing for your psychic development is to do readings. I mean, at least if you want to be able to do that. Now, if you're developing in another arena, I mean, then you need to do that thing and you need to do it as often as possible, okay? So, you may only see one possible future. But remember, if you're not that experienced, you should not assume that that is the only possibility. In fact,